Hello and welcome back to the program. I'm Maribel Lopez, and this is the AI with Maribel Lopez program. I'm really excited to be here today talking about all the interesting things that are going on with AI as always. And today I'm joined with Jarrod Johnson. He is the Chief Customer Officer at TaskUs. Jarrod, welcome to the program.
Hey, Maribel, thanks for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. I'm very excited for the new year. I think we've got a lot going on this year. I think there's going to be a lot of great opportunity in terms of changing all kinds of great business things with AI. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Maybe we could get started by you telling us a little bit about the company and what you do and what it means to be a chief customer officer.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I've been at TaskUs for about 9 years. We are a digital services company. We're in what we call the business process outsourcing space. A bunch of that is what you might consider customer care or customer experience work. That's about 60% of our revenues. We tend to serve some of the largest technology brands in the world, a lot of the names that are right on the front of your home screen on your phone. And we also have a couple other pieces of our business. We have an AI services practice where we actually help companies build the AI technologies, machine learning technologies that they're deploying out to customers. And then we have a trust and safety practice, which we like to think of as like the police force of the social web, keeping bad actors, fraud, and bad things happening to brands, keeping all those things off their platforms.
Those actually really dovetail really nicely together. And they're also very important each in their own right. So that makes a lot of sense. I know when we've been talking about the role of a chief customer officer, it can be different in different companies. Sometimes it's traditional sales or account management. Sometimes it's a different concept of leadership. So when we look at something like a chief customer officer in the context of AI transformation, what does that look like?
Yeah, a lot of companies might have a chief revenue officer, which really just implies like sales, 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 right? We were
Right.
pretty conscious of the title when I took the role in 2017, I think it was. I run basically all the go-to-market functions for the company. So all the places where we touch the end clients. I do not do any of the hard work and operations that actually services customers every day. They leave that to the professionals. But the way I like to think of the role differently is I like to look at all of the customer journey. So what are our clients experiencing as they relate to us? Whether they're a prospect considering working with TaskUs for the first time, what is that experience like as you get to know TaskUs? And then the biggest part of my job is the retention of clients and growth with clients, trying to understand what is it that they really need to solve their business problems. Are we involved in the most meaningful projects in their ecosystem, and trying to become this like strategic partner to help them on, their journey. So the context there is trying to really sense and respond to what's happening in the market, the demand signals that we see, and then I build teams to go try to satisfy them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think that there's so many different ways you could look at that role. So it's always good to get a little level set on what people are thinking about. Now, you mentioned at least three different areas that TaskUs is working with customers.
Mhm.
And I wonder from that, and I'm sure it's a wide range of customers as well from the introduction. What are some of the biggest bottlenecks that you're seeing in customer experience today? And where does AI fit into that?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everybody's trying to deploy some sort of AI technology to improve the business experience, save money, drive efficiency. The biggest bottleneck that most of our clients are seeing is not having the organized knowledge to be able to train an AI system to execute work in the way you want it to. I would say the second thing is it's actually not that hard to build these AI chatbots. It's shockingly simple, but there aren't a lot of people who've got proven experience doing it multiple times. So it's a relatively nascent landscape, and how do you find the person inside your organization who's really set up to go tackle that kind of project, take on that initiative for you? So those are kind of the big bottlenecks. I would say knowledge in the tangible sense, and then talent.
Yeah, when we did some of our research, the knowledge data, there's a couple different ways you could say this, but that seemed to be the number one block for people. They
Yeah.
either didn't have the right data, it was um, poorly labeled or tagged, or just wasn't going to work for what they were trying to do. And then,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, talent was probably, I think that was our fourth bottleneck that we looked at. And we see that all up and down the stack, which is probably one of the reasons why they work with companies like you, is because, we're looking for a certain set of augmentation of talent. So that makes sense. So the big thing that's been going on in our world, uh, on the AI side for, well, really, we've been talking about it for more than a year, but I just started to see some interesting heat and light happen around AI agents at the end of 2025. It started to feel like the tools were a little better. It was a little more tangible for organizations to maybe consider. But I'm wondering from your perspective, if you could walk us a little bit through how you're thinking about agentic AI and, can it work for real customer interactions? Uh, are there issues with handoffs between AI and humans? There just seems to be a lot of questions that when people talk to us about AI, they're unclear about the boundaries of what is or what isn't and what could even be agentic.
Yeah. So I'll start with sort of the baseline premise. Like a lot of people are deploying AI chatbots, right? And
Yes.
essentially, what I think the industry is doing a pretty good job of moving quickly is to replace the old, like, question and response chatbots that were more
Okay.
decision tree based to actually like an interactive experience using a voice or chat based LLM. Like the conversation is just much better, right? But
Mhm.
for the most part, they've not done the heavy work to make it agentic or give it agency to actually go do tasks on your behalf, right? And that's because it's hard. You have to define the business process correctly. You have to integrate the systems so that the chatbot can now go back to your um, you know, inventory system and do a inventory lookup and tell you whether you have the product in stock or not, or what's the status of the shipment. Like that's actually hard. So the front end piece I'm seeing a pretty good job being done. The second step to actually go take action for a client is the harder part. And that's really where the magic's going to happen. And that's the only way you're really going to get to replace human intervention where you want to is when you actually get this AI agent to go take action on the customer's behalf.
Yeah, and I think this discussion around action, it's the biggest opportunity, but I think customers also think about it as a risk. And they, the people that are deploying it, it's like, well, how far should we let them go? Do we let them process refunds? Do we let them reset passwords? Where are the boundaries around that? So that's one of the things I think, and actually, frankly, just strategy of understanding, how do we get from the promise of what a chatbot is to actually delivering a good, well-functioning chatbot, I think is still something that a lot of organizations are struggling with. We've seen a lot of fancy chatbot demos, but yet many times I go in and they're still not operating the way they should be. So when you think about how to help customers through this process, is there something that you talk to them about how to get started with agentic AI?
Yeah, I mean, we oftentimes start with a simple use case. And so we try to look at what are the reasons that customers call? Let's pick one or two and let's process map that out and let's go through a simple implementation. The technologies from the leading partners are relatively straightforward, but we encourage customers to go get started and pick a path. And rather than just the simplest work type, we're trying to look at something that has real ROI behind it if we can. Like something that, like, if we could really solve this problem, wouldn't that be valuable? So, there's a lot of nuances in that. How do I make sure that just these types of interactions are coming through? And then how do I process map it? But we like to handhold them through that process of how do you write these agent operating procedures? This is the best way to write those procedures. It's a business process. You may have it documented somewhere, but you have to do it in a way that the AI can then learn from and then execute on your behalf. So we just walk them through that. Normally, it's one interaction type to start, and then we build and we build and we build until we get, if not all the interaction types, the bulk of the interaction types handled by the system.
I love this concept because we talk a lot to organizations as well about, there's this land and expand. What's your first AI ROI use case that's actually going to deliver value to you and scope it, make it small, make it measurable. Then, once you get that going, you start to build momentum. You keep adding more and more and more as time goes on. And it's not, if you tackle it from like, okay, we're going to do this whole workflow right out of the gate, and we're going to reimagine the customer experience, you kind of get in this doom loop of like, how long does it take to deploy something? Do I know if it's working? So I think that that smaller incremental approach can really work well for a lot of organizations. And then you mentioned, basically, honestly, some of the biggest challenges we've had in the beginning, I think, were the concept of, oh, AI is like really new and cool and different. What can it do? As opposed to, I need to solve this problem, right? We got to move the NPS by, X point by Y date. What's the thing? Is it that they have bad billing? Is it their poor shipping policies? What's that thing that's going to move it for me? So I think if you really focus on a set of use cases where you can measure them and they move the needle even in a small way, then that kind of gets it going. So I really like that approach. And I know there's a lot of complexity, and I know that you've talked about TaskUs as the complexity experts. So I think that you're probably helping them through a lot of that. Do you think we're at this state today where we could use agentic AI for complex technical or emotionally nuanced customer moments, or are we, still for like say the next year going to be in the things that are more basic and mainstream and just trying to get those right?
I think we're in an age right now where we're trying to make sure the AI can handle the fundamentals, right?
Yeah,
We've
I
got
agree with that.
a financial services client that's a kind of a neobank, digital bank, and there's a lot of things that consumers call in about that really are relatively simple. Where did my deposit drop? I think I lost my card. Can you lock it for me? There's just so many interaction types that can be executed well by AI right now. Where our clients tend to stop is when there's a policy decision like, you need to refund this to my card. I want to dispute this charge. Or if like they'll have keywords in the model that'll say like if the emotional response is above this threshold, like kick it to a human. And so that may be just people being cautious right now, and that's okay. But I also think they want that human touch for those critical moments when, like, you think about healthcare examples. We just talked about financial services examples. Those critical moments, they want humans to step in and have that emotional connection, calm the situation, and then resolve for the customer. So right now, that's where we see our customers kind of stopping, right? But there's so many interaction types where you can create an easier experience for the customer through the use of technology. We see people flooding towards solving those first.
It's interesting because I've just been on a few NRF briefings because that's
Mm.
coming up for the retail
Yeah.
show, and there's a lot of discussion about friction. And sometimes I think we think about like really big friction points, but when you talk to the retailers or the quick service restaurants, they're talking about things like, well, how do I make pizza ordering easier, right? Like, what's the friction point in that? Sometimes it's just knowing how many pizzas to order. So how can AI help you with that, right? So there's just a lot of opportunity, as you mentioned, and things that might sound simple, but are still very powerful for the customer, right? Particularly if I'm ordering pizza, I need to be able to know that, I'm going to get the right amount of pizzas, right? Nobody wants to be hungry and missing pizza. So, but I'm still amazed at how, where we are in terms of what we could do, but what we still need to do, right? The fundamentals is still key.
Yeah, the other thing I think we're seeing as a big opportunity is the AI technologies have the capability to remember who you are, right? So they, the pizza example, right? Hey, you ordered two mediums last time. Is that what you're looking to do again? This persistent history and starting to really understand who you are as a customer, it's a huge opportunity. And that really didn't exist in the previous iterations of technology evolution, whether that was kiosks or self-service online or the old chatbots. That's a huge potential leap, right? Is this true personalization of understanding and interaction with the customer?
Yeah, that context and persistent memory is something we've been talking about for decades, right?
Yep.
Really. And to your point, we're just starting to see that come into the market in a meaningful way now. And you mentioned the neobank, and they'll actually have the benefit of starting with everything digital from scratch and
Yep.
having this AI technology on top of it. So it's a huge advantage for them to get to what they, they're the know your customer or the customer 360 or even the customer 270. We laugh about that sometimes, but I'm like, hey, if you could just get me 270, it might be really, really great. We don't have to get all the way to 360 yet. Just like help me out here. So I think we're starting to see some of that come around. Now, one of the things that's also kind of interesting in our world, there's a lot of discussion about whether or not AI is about cost savings or revenue generation or both, or when do we get to either. But in the beginning, we see most of the organizations that we talk to try to look for a cost reduction use case. And, looking at some of the things that you've had, we've seen, it could be 25 to 50% cost reductions in certain areas. That's a significant percentage, right? And I'm sure it varies dramatically on use case. But I was wondering if you could share a couple of examples of what you're actually seeing in deployments. Are people really getting cost savings? Are there specific industries or use cases or things that hold true versus where it doesn't?
Yeah, it depends on where you're at as a business, right? For
Mhm.
example, if you're a food delivery business and you've already got all of your customer support in the Philippines and India, and you're taking advantage of that labor arbitrage, the cost of the software compared to that per contact, it is lower, but it's not like a dramatic savings. So you actually have to streamline the processes with the technology in order to really get that double digit kind of save. But I'll give you another example. We have a telehealth business that connects patients with counselors. So it's kind of like a marketplace. And because of the HIPAA and health data, it's got to all be onshore, so to speak. The data can't leave the US. So they have to service those appointment settings and scheduling with domestic call center agents. Well, those are really expensive, right? And the big opportunity for this client was you have people cancel their appointments and you have to reschedule them. And sometimes they don't call back and they don't get back on the phone. And so there's a revenue loss opportunity there. So one thing to be able to potentially save money by not using a domestic call center agent for a relatively simple thing like setting an appointment. But the bigger opportunity for them was to be able to deploy more resources to actually get the patient to come back and reschedule the appointment or not cancel the appointment. So it was really a revenue lift opportunity for them. And that's been wildly successful. It's voice-based AI, which if you would have asked me a year ago, Maribel, I would have said voice is a ways off. Let's focus on chat for now. But these voice AI models have gotten sufficiently sufficiently progressed, right? They're now able to actually handle a live interaction in a way that doesn't feel artificial.
Yeah, we had for a while, it just sort of felt it stumbled, it took too long, the latency was too high, it had a robotic voice, it had all these things that were sort of off-putting that didn't make it feel like a real voice transaction, but now it feels a lot better. And I swear, like somebody was giving me a voice AI the other day and just didn't say it. I was like, it's just too perfect, And then it kind of clipped off right away. And I'm like, a real human wouldn't have hung up the phone that quickly. So, but it's
Yeah.
little nuances like that that are kind of interesting.
Yeah, I had an interesting interaction post holidays. My fiance was returning something to a major retailer, like an online retailer. And she called in, it's on speakerphone because she's trying to look up the order number and all this stuff. And it was very clear to me that it was a AI agent. And the interaction was pretty solid. And I was like really impressed with this retailer. I'm like, this is pretty cool. I'm surprised they're this far ahead. Well, then the AI had to stop because there was a refund involved. And she gets back into the call to a live agent and has to repeat all of the information she had already given the AI. And I'm like, oh, you had it.
You were so
You,
close,
you
so
were so
close.
close. So it goes, I love that people are out there like deploying this stuff and we're seeing the progress in the marketplace. There's just still such a huge opportunity, which is why I think clients need to try to not go alone on this stuff. They need to try to talk to partners who see these use cases all the time. They've gone through the stumbling blocks. Some of the other things like training the models to avoid behavior that you don't want to see. We're seeing, you have some stories in the news about suicide and self-harm through the emotional relationships with AI technologies. like you have to be prepared to protect your brand from those things. So there's a huge safety element, bias element that you have to be prepared for as well. And it's, I would like brands to recognize that they're probably going to need some help.
So this AI guardrails discussion that you have is really, really interesting because it doesn't necessarily happen in human conversations per se. So,
Hmm.
there's really very limited chance that you're going to call a contact center human agent and they're going to convince you to commit suicide, right?
Right.
That's probably not going to happen. So it fits into the category, as you just mentioned, Jared, of the things you don't know, the
Yeah.
things that you didn't even consider as a possibility because they weren't a possibility in the way you ran your processes before, so they're not on the radar. And I think one of the biggest issues that we can resolve with AI is figuring out what the unknowns are for
Yeah.
your business and making sure that you can protect against that. You want to get the experience right, but then there are all these other things that you didn't think about. The other thing I think is kind of fascinating is as organizations, a lot of our processes are flawed. They're not very streamlined. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity for our next wave of this after we just get it, what I would call base level working, is to really reinvent those processes and workflows. And we've talked about this. I mean, you've been there for 9 years. I'm sure you've seen several iterations of like, how do we think of business process reinvention? How do we, you know, get this so that it's not just more efficient, but it's more effective? Like, yes, you can do robotic process automation and speed up a process, but it's still not a great process, right? How do we
Yeah.
get the double dip on that and say, okay, we've sped up the process and it's a better process now. So there's a good opportunity. Maybe we can work with AI to kind of say, okay, what would make this more efficient? I mean, I start to do that now in my world. We have quite
Yeah.
a bit of production, as you might imagine, and there's all sorts of things that can go wrong in production. So how do we work through that? And I've been in the past 6 months, I've been really surprised at how well it's working. So I'm optimistic, I guess. But then again, I'm an optimistic person. So we just talked about cost reduction. Um, but there's lots of other things that we could be looking at, right? So are there other KPIs that you're helping organizations track or work through?
Yeah, one of the things we like to coach our clients on is if you leave this to just a product team to go implement a piece of AI technology for you, you better make sure you bring the people who run the current operation with the humans along with you because they
Yep.
understand how this thing has to really operate and what the metrics are and and what really matters to that customer experience over time. Product teams, sometimes the product's perfect. It's a human that's that's got the flaws. But the reality is your customer support organization is dealing with these problems every single day. So to more shortly answer your question, we try to bring those same metrics and KPIs along to measure the technology. So what's the customer satisfaction scores through surveys? What are the quality metrics we expect the technology to operate within? And are they hitting that with higher accuracy than trained humans can execute it? There's also a huge opportunity with the AI-based solutions in a call center environment. You might not be able to record, sample, and listen to every single call. In an AI world, whether it's chat or a call or whatever, you can actually analyze every single interaction and you can score every single call. That is a data opportunity that just has not been there for brands historically, without spending a tremendous amount of money. And so that's a real opportunity where you can actually measure things you couldn't measure with humans in the past. So that's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, I think all those are we talk a lot about quality management and changing the concept of quality management. And the other thing is, except for the in-person interactions, which you can't really do that easily with AI. If you and I have had a call, there's no reason why I should need to get a survey later on how that call went.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
That seems inefficient. I may or may not remember. I'm certainly, probably not going to take the time to answer unless it was a terrible call, right? So I think we get a lot more information if we can do quality management in a different way. So I think we're all very excited about that. And we've been talking about it for a while. And sometimes I sit around and I'm like, well, why aren't we all doing it? Like, what's the bottleneck that's keeping us from doing that? Because that seems like one of those low-hanging fruit ROIs that you spoke about. Is that a process issue? Is that a technology deployment issue? What do you think it is?
I think so many brands are just dealing with the bumps in the night, the things that break during the day, that they don't have large enough teams stepping back to do truly detailed analytics on what the customer experience and what the customer journey really is. And maybe haven't had the tools historically, right? To your point, like 1 out of 100 people responding to a survey, is that really meaningful data, right? Now we're starting to see that open up. And then as you allow the technology to take over more of the day-to-day operation, you now have freed up human talent inside the organization to actually think about better, faster, cheaper, more efficient, whatever. So I think that's a big opportunity. The other thing with the AI technologies is most of the providers are building in like recommendation engines that are coming to you proactively with like insights from the call and chat data. Like that's pretty fascinating. And our clients beg us for those insights because we're on the front lines. We're dealing with these interactions every single day. So that's a big value add they want from us is to deliver that. And now that the technology can do it as well, it's just another opportunity. More data, more analysis, more recommendations for and opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, as people are getting into these chatbots, we were talking about this, as I mentioned earlier in the NRF briefings. We're hearing a lot more about people are putting in longer questions with more information and more detail. And that gives you the opportunity to really start to know the customer better and to figure out latent demand signals and profile differently than we had in the past. I think the demographic profiling that we did from, say, 5 years ago is going to look completely irrelevant moving forward. We're going to have a much better way of thinking about how do we profile, how do we do micro segmentation. But there's just a ton of opportunity with, as you mentioned, all this additional information that you could be getting out of this, right?
Now, if you think about the customer care industry, um, the length of the call has been a major governing factor, or the length of the chat or whatever has been a major governing factor because it determined how much you had to spend on humans to do the work. The models that we're seeing come from the software providers right now, unless you're talking about a very long interaction, something like a healthcare insurance claim that might be 30 minutes or something,
Yeah.
they're basically pricing it per interaction. So you have the opportunity to free up the virtual agent, the AI agent, to handle the contact appropriately, like whatever that means, to be on the phone as long as that old lady who wants to understand your coupon strategy wants to be on the phone with you, right?
It's true, right?
So it opens up some really interesting opportunities, and it'll be interesting to see how the commercial models evolve over time as well.
I agree with that. I think there's a lot going on there. Well, in AI in general, I don't think we've solved the if you're using foundation models, what are those foundation models going to cost you as a software provider moving forward, right? So there's still a lot of flux, let's just say, in the system that we haven't worked out yet. But we'll get to a better place on it. Now I think everybody's just trying to figure out, well, what do people find value in? What actually works? How do we make it a little more affordable? It's very Wild West right now, and I haven't seen anything this dynamic. And well, probably since back when people were really building the internet. It
Yeah.
feels like that in terms of like order of magnitude. Even the mobile evolution was incredible and powerful and super dynamic, but not as wild and crazy as this is. Um,
Well,
but we digress.
yeah, that example though, right? I mean, so I think of it the same way. This feels a lot more like the dot-com boom than the like phone evolution. There were five major handset providers, right? And five ecosystems to build an app on or something.
Right.
I look at this AI marketplace in almost every segment. If you just look at AI for customer service, there's like hundreds of players on the CB Insights map or something, right? Hyper fragmented. And it'll be really interesting to see how that shakes out. I think you're going to see these plays at like right now it's customer service, maybe is one box to play in. And then you're going to see, well, I specialize in it for financial services, or I specialize in it for retail and travel, or something. I think you're going to see verticalization, so they can really address the pain points of these unique industries. And I certainly don't think 150 players in that one box are going to all survive.
No, no, and it's everywhere. It's actually in all the AI tooling stack. There's a lot of players in each bucket. It's in every aspect of customer experience. There are a lot of players in each bucket. So I see exactly what you mean by that. But This is a time I think where there's a difference between having a long-standing company and having an idea. And
Yeah.
we're really in the idea phase right now. The ideas is company phase, which hopefully will translate into those ideas being wrapped up into product platforms that can make it easier to deploy and scale and manage. And, back to what we were talking about earlier, this concept of, why is AI not easy to deploy in an organization? Because there are a lot of choices and
Yeah.
you have to know a lot about a lot to actually get all of them right. And that's where for some parts of the process, you definitely need to lean on partners. You need to have advisors. There's a lot that goes on to making this work because you just don't have all the skill sets in house to do it. But it's doable, and it's doable. It doesn't have to be all done at once. It can be done in chunks, as you mentioned. I think that's what makes this a more manageable evolution for organizations. Where, when we went into cloud computing, I think there was a lot of okay, do we lift and shift it? Do we try to do it a different way? And it took us about 15 years to settle on, well, some stuff will live here and some stuff will live there. And we'll go back and forth between these two things. And I think we started with building AI in a hybrid fashion to begin with. So that was at least one decision that was taken off the table. But there were so many others, right? And so many different types of AI and like what makes the most sense for you. And how do you do specialization in industry and all this other stuff? Like you mentioned healthcare and all the regulations that are related to that, right? That's a big thing all of its own. Well, I know we could talk. So I always like to ask a little bit, maybe not predictions. I don't think predictions are all that easy to do in a space like this. Um, so sometimes I want to focus on, what's something that people are doing that maybe they shouldn't be doing either in customer experience or in agentic AI, something that they're getting wrong, a pitfall that we can help them to avoid. So if you have any suggestions on, here's something that we see people do that's, a pitfall that they can avoid, I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah. I have a few thoughts on this. When I talk to CEOs and customer experience officers, CIOs, I always tell them go get started and get started small, which is totally counter to what the software providers want to tell you, right? They want you to buy big and they want
Drop
to,
in.
yeah, right. And so there's some tension there, but I've been encouraging leaders to go get started in an area and to pull teams together from multiple disciplines to go solve the problem. Don't just give it to an engineering team or a product team. Like you need to pull product and operations together, potentially marketing, so you really understand what's the brand voice that I'm creating in this environment. Small, agile teams that have some autonomy and flexibility to move with agility and really solve problems in whatever sphere. It could be customer experience, could be, finance and accounting. So I encourage them all to go get started, first of all. And the second thing is, we talked about it briefly, you need to get your data in order. You 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 can't make any of this work without the foundational knowledge and data to allow the system to do its job. And then you have to be prepared to make all the policy updates along the way. Every time you launch a new promotion, every time you have a policy change on returns, every time you launch a new product, you've got to be able to feed that knowledge into the system. So, small agile teams out doing work and then making sure you have your head around the core data. And I think if you do those two things, you'll start to see enough progress that you'll get that momentum and kind of flywheel effect going.
That makes total sense. I think you and I are very much aligned on that. And I actually laughed when you said, the software vendors start in a different place because I feel the same way with the agentic AI. Both the software and the agentic AI and the platform guys are like, you can drop this in, you can do all this stuff today. And it kind of becomes this terror moment, right? Because which creates indecision in an organization. And that's actually not what you want. You want to create forward momentum, right? So it's like, well, out of the 18 things that I can provide you today, like which ones of these can we get up and running in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, to kind of get you going, right? And expand. And I think if we took a more slow roll, it's the same with agentic AI. We've had a lot of organizations coming around saying, hey, you can do agentic AI today and it can fully automate these processes. And customers are sitting there going, and what could go wrong? Where's the security? Where's the manageability? There's a lot of stuff. Do the what kind of information do agents have access to, and how do we give them identities and security around that? And I think we have some serious questions to solve. It doesn't mean that the technology couldn't work. It just means we need to be thoughtful about how we roll it out there, right?
right?
Jared, any closing thoughts from you on what organizations should know?
I just encourage people to be brave and take some risks. And, probably we're trying to figure out our role in this whole thing, but we're trying to be the kind of partner that sits alongside these customers on their journey to help them, with lessons learned, with best practices, with accelerators, to help them be successful. And so I would tell people go get started and don't go alone.
I love that. That's a great way of ending the call. Thank you so much for your time and attention, Jared. And I look forward to seeing what you guys help people build.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Maribel.